In the heart of the shining Aryan system stood the great palace of crystal towers and golden bridges, a place where the air shimmered with soft light and music seemed to drift from the walls themselves, and it was here that Princess Leora lived. A figure spoken of in every corner of the known galaxy. Her beauty was not only in her graceful form and radiant eyes, but in the way she carried herself with a calm strength that no riches could buy. She was the dream of kings, warriors, and merchants alike, yet none had ever touched her heart. From the edge of distant star clusters to the great cities of the central worlds, countless suitors came bearing gifts of impossible worth, jewels carved from the cores of dead suns, starships shaped like living creatures, oceans held in crystal spheres, promises of power that could sway whole empires. And yet Leora would listen with polite patience before turning each one away. Her refusals were never cruel, but they were final, leaving many to return home in silence, their dreams undone. The court whispered that perhaps she sought perfection, a mind and heart that could match her own, or perhaps she would never choose at all, and some said she only played a long game to keep her father's kingdom free from binding alliances. But even the king himself could not read the truth in her eyes. Every celebration, every royal gathering became a quiet battlefield of charm and persuasion. Suitors from worlds of fire and ice stood in line, hoping to be the one, yet none moved her in the slightest. She danced through her days as though untouched by the hopes and schemes that swirled around her. Still beyond the jeweled halls, beyond the endless diplomacy, the king felt the strain building. Each refusal was a slight to another world, a broken promise of unity and peace. Tensions gathered like storm clouds above a quiet sea. The people did not know it yet, but her choices rippled outward into the politics of half the galaxy, and the wrong decision could tip the balance. And then one day, as though fate had tired of the endless cycle, a petition came to the royal court, not from the proud and ancient powers, but from a small and newly admitted race in the Galactic Union, a species few in Orion had ever seen or spoken to. They called themselves humans, and their request was not for marriage or alliance, but for a meeting to discuss simple trade agreements. It was almost laughable to the nobles, but the king approved it for reasons known only to him. The day the human envoy arrived, no one expected anything more than another dull formality, certainly not the first turn in a story that would change the course of the princess's life forever. The morning of the meeting began like many others in the Aryan court, with banners of silver silk swaying in the light that streamed down through the tall crystal windows, and the soft hum of attendants moving about their work. But a quiet curiosity hung in the air, for today the princess would meet a representative of the humans, a people barely known among the great powers of the stars. The nobles expected nothing from it, and whispered that it was a waste of the princess's time, yet still they came to watch, for there was little entertainment more satisfying than seeing outsiders flounder before the royal presence. When the envoy arrived, he did not come draped in shimmering robes or with a caravan of rare gifts. His name was Evan, and he wore a plain suit that seemed almost strange against the jeweled walls of the palace. His hair slightly wind-tossed from the journey, his hands unadorned, his eyes steady but not defiant. He bowed with a respectful ease that lacked the stiff, rehearsed gestures so common in the court. There was no performance in him, only an unforced politeness. Princess Leora greeted him with the same calm grace she had shown to 1,000 others, yet as they began to speak, she noticed something unusual in his voice. It carried no hidden bargain, no attempt to dazzle her with titles or wealth. He spoke of his home world in a way that felt alive, painting pictures of green forests and blue seas, of skies that burned with gold at sunrise and faded to deep violet at night. He described music that was made not for ceremony but for joy, and stories told not for power, but to keep the past alive in the hearts of children. She found herself asking more questions than she had planned, and for a moment she forgot the eyes of the court watching. From behind the grand pillars, Evan answered each question with the same openness, as if he had nothing to hide and nothing to prove to anyone. He seemed almost unaware of how out of place he should have been in this hall of shimmering pride and ancient power. The nobles exchanged glances. Some smirked at what they saw as simplicity. Others frowned at his lack of deference to the elaborate customs of Orion. But Leora's thoughts were elsewhere. She could not remember the last time she had spoken to someone who seemed to see her as a person, and not a prize, a mind and voice, rather than a symbol to be won. When the meeting ended, she told herself it was only courtesy that made her linger a moment longer before giving her farewell. Yet, as Evan was led away by attendants, she felt a strange pull to see him again, not for duty, not for politics, but for something she could not yet name. That night in the quiet of her chambers, with the twin moons casting pale light across the balcony, she found her mind returning again and again to the sound of his voice, the shape of his words, and the way he had looked at her without the hunger she had come to expect from all others. She told herself it meant nothing, but deep down a quiet seed of curiosity had already begun to grow, and though she did not yet know it, the path of her life had just shifted. In the days that followed, Princess Leora found reasons to meet the human envoy again, and each time she told herself it was for the sake of understanding the trade proposals better, or to ensure that diplomatic respect was maintained. Yet these excuses rang hollow even to her own heart, for she noticed that her steps grew lighter on the mornings when she knew they would speak, and her mind held a quiet anticipation that court duties had not stirred in years. Their talks often began with official matters, but they wandered easily into other paths. Evan spoke of his people with a warmth that brought life to his words, telling her about the wide open plains where wind rushed over tall grass, and the deep forests where the air smelled of rain and earth. He spoke of the way humans argued and laughed in the same breath, and how even in struggle they found reasons to sing and celebrate. He told her about his family and friends, and the way each person carried dreams that no one else could live for them. Leora shared in return, speaking of the gardens of Orion that grew flowers which bloomed only under the light of both moons, and of the great ocean cities where glass domes shone like jewels beneath the waves. Yet she found herself not speaking as a princess, delivering practiced phrases, but as a woman sharing the quiet truths of her life. She told him about her mother's songs and the way she would walk the gardens at night to clear her mind from the weight of endless decisions. She spoke of the ache that came from being seen as a prize and not as a person, and she noticed that Evan listened without trying to solve her or offer empty comfort. He simply heard her, but in the shadows of the court eyes were watching, and whispers began to grow. The alien nobles who had long vied for her hand did not miss the way her gaze lingered on the human, or the way she laughed in his presence in a way she had not done with anyone else before. Some dismissed him as a passing distraction, yet others felt the stir of unease, for they feared what it would mean if the princess chose someone outside the ancient circles of power. Rumors reached the ears of those who would not hesitate to protect their own ambitions, and soon quiet plans were set in motion to ensure the human's visits would end. Some tried to burden him with endless formalities. Others spread word that his presence insulted the dignity of the royal court. But Evan met each challenge with a calm persistence that neither flattered nor fought. He seemed to move through the tensions as though they were simply another obstacle. On a long road, Leora began to sense the danger that was growing around him, and it lit a new fire within her. She had always stood apart from the games of the court, but now she felt drawn into them for his sake, and though she had not yet spoken the truth aloud even to herself, she knew she would not stand by if harm came to him, for already the thought of losing his presence left an ache she could not ignore. The day the challenge came began like any other in the palace, yet beneath the glittering halls, the undercurrent of tension was thick and unspoken. The court had gathered for a public audience, and the high banners swayed gently above as the nobles took their places in rows of shimmering fabrics and polished armor. The air carried the faint scent of flowers from the gardens, yet it did nothing to soften the sharp edge of the mood. It was during this gathering that a rival suitor stepped forward, a tall figure from one of the older and prouder worlds, his voice carrying the arrogance of generations. He bowed to the king, but his words were aimed directly at Leora and at the human standing quietly among the envoys. He declared that this outsider was unworthy, not by failing of heart, but by the plain fact of his nature that a human could not hold honor in a court such as Arian's, and that such an insult to the throne could not be allowed to stand. The murmurs rose in the hall like the swell of an approaching storm. Leora stepped forward to speak, but the council overrode her voice, declaring that if the human wished to remain, he must prove himself in the trial of honor, an ancient test that had seen warriors of great power fall. The trial was meant for the bodies and senses of species shaped by generations of survival in harsh worlds. It was not meant for a man from a planet of gentle air and balanced gravity. Evan heard the terms without flinching, and when the king asked if he would accept, he simply nodded, not with the eagerness of one seeking glory, but with the quiet resolve of a man who understood what refusal would mean to those who doubted him. The trial would begin at dawn in the arena that lay beyond the palace walls, a place where the ground shifted beneath the feet and the air shimmered with heat, where obstacles moved and struck without warning, and the final test required not only endurance, but the ability to think under pressure. When the sun rose over Orion's twin peaks, the arena gates opened, and Evan stepped inside wearing only light armor and carrying no weapon save for a short blade. The crowd was vast and restless, eager to see the human fail the first challenge. Came swiftly, the shifting ground tilting and rolling in great waves as though the earth itself wished to throw him down. He staggered, but he watched the rhythm of the movement and adjusted his steps, choosing balance over speed. The next test brought great metallic beasts, driven by ancient mechanisms, their limbs striking with deadly force, and yet he found paths between them, using their weight and momentum against them, rather than facing them head-on. By the time he reached the final task, his breath came heavy and sweat darkened his clothes, yet there was a spark in his eyes that had not dimmed. The last challenge was a wall of moving light and shadow patterns that confused the senses and struck at the mind. As much as the body, he slowed his pace, ignoring the jeers of the crowd. He studied the timing of each shift, then passed through in a single steady walk, emerging into the open, with the morning light breaking across his face. Arena was silent for a long moment, before scattered voices began to call out, not in mockery, but in reluctant approval. Leora stepped forward into the arena, her voice carrying across the space, as she declared that no one who had seen what he had done could deny his courage. The rival suitor turned away in defeat, but the council remained divided, for to choose him would still shake the foundations of the alliances they had built. The king met his daughter's gaze and spoke in a tone that carried both warning and resignation, telling her this was her final chance to reconsider, for the path she was choosing would change the future of Orion. Yet she did not hesitate, and in that moment, the choice in her heart became unshakable. Great Hall of Orion had never felt so heavy with silence. The banners that usually danced in the air seemed to hang still, as if the palace itself held its breath. The nobles stood in their long rows, their faces painted with expectation, suspicion, or barely hidden anger. The king sat upon the high seat, his hands resting on the carved arms, as his gaze moved slowly between his daughter and the human who stood at her side. The light from the twin moons streamed through the tall crystal windows, spilling across the polished floor until it reached the center, where Leora now stood alone. She spoke with a voice that carried no tremor and no hesitation. She told them all that she would not be bound by the games of politics or by the weight of ancient alliances. She had heard the voices that warned her. She had felt the pressure of every suitor who sought her for power, and position, and she had turned them all away because none had looked at her as Evan did. None had spoken to her as though she were simply herself without crown or title. She declared that she would stand beside him, not because of grand promises or royal demands, but because her heart had chosen freely and would not be moved. The reaction was like the breaking of a great wave. Some nobles turned away in fury, their robes sweeping the floor as they left. Others muttered to one another, their faces tight with calculation. Yet there were a few who nodded in quiet respect, for they knew that the courage to choose one's own path was a strength few could match. The king's eyes lingered on his daughter, and then on the man she had chosen. His silence stretched long enough for the air to grow tense and still. But at last he rose, and with a voice that filled the hall, he gave his blessing, though his words carried the weight of warning and the knowledge that challenges would follow. Evan stepped forward, not with the pride of a man who had won a prize, but with the humility of one who understood the depth of what was being given to him. He took her hand before the entire court, and his simple words carried more meaning than the richest speeches. He told her that he had never sought a crown or a throne, and that what he valued was the bond they had built in the quiet spaces between the duties and the watching eyes. From that day, their union became a story that passed from world to world, carried in the songs of travelers and the whispers of diplomats. It was said that the Princess of Orion, who had been desired by all, had chosen a human, not for power but for love, and that this choice became a symbol that in a galaxy of endless divisions, it was still possible to build bridges that no war could, destroying the gardens beyond the palace walls where flowers of light opened only beneath the glow of both moons. Leora and Evan walked side by side, their hands intertwined. The night air was warm and filled with the faint hum of distant city lights. They spoke softly of the days ahead, knowing that the road would not be free of trials, yet certain that together they could face them. And as the wind moved through the leaves above, it carried with it the quiet promise of a new chapter for them and for the stars themselves. The end.